morning. So in class we're going to start reading Roald Dahl's Matilda. I know we've all watched the film over time, but I thought it'd be really nice to actually read the book as well, because sometimes the books are slightly different to what you see on a film. We're also then going to do some work during our written English work, so it'll be really helpful to listen to this. I will try and do a few at a time, and so then whenever you want to listen to some, you can. Today I'm just going to start with chapter 1 because that's what we're going to be working on. But over the course of a week I'll add extras onto Purple Mash or YouTube, whichever I can get them to load onto. So, it says, it's a funny thing about mothers and fathers, even when their own child is the most disgusting blister you could ever imagine, they still think he or she is wonderful. Some parents go even further. They become so blinded by adoration, so they love their children so much, they manage to convince themselves that their child has got qualities of a genius. Well, there is nothing wrong with this at all. It's the way of the world. It's only when the parents start telling us about the brilliance of their own revolting offspring that we start shouting, "Ugh, bring us a basin, we're going to be sick." And that's our lady there that we're going to be looking at. She's called Matilda. School teachers suffer a great deal from having to listen to this sort of twaddle from proud parents, but they usually get their own back when it comes to writing end of term reports. Not Mrs. Mayron. If I were a teacher, I would cook up some real scorchers, said Roald Dahl. He says, he would write, "Your son Maximilian is a total washout. I hope you have a family business that you can push him into, because otherwise when he leaves school, he's never going to get a job." Or if I was feeling lyrical that day, I might write, "It's a curious truth that grasshoppers have hearing organs on the side of their abdomen. But your daughter Vanessa, judging by what she's learnt this term, has got no hearing organs at all." I might even delve even deeper into natural history and say, the periodical cicada spends 6 years as a grub, so like a little maggoty thing, underground, and no more than 6 days as a free animal in sunlight and air. Your son Wilfred has spent 6 years as a grub at this school. We're still waiting for him to come out of his chrysalis. A particular poisonous little girl might sting me into saying, Fiona has the glacial beauty of an iceberg, but unlike an iceberg, she has definitely got nothing going on under the surface. I think I might enjoy writing on the end of term reports for stinkers in my class, but enough of that, we have to get on. What do you think would happen if Mrs. Mayron wrote reports like that? Good job I don't. There we go, that's a parent saying, look how wonderful Wilfred is. There we go. So, this is our story. Occasionally one comes across a parent who takes the opposite line, who shows no interest at all in their children, and these, of course, are far worse than the doting ones. Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood were two such parents. They had a son called Michael and a daughter called Matilda, and the parents looked upon Matilda in particular as nothing more than a scab. So what do you think that might mean? Nothing more than a scab. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? It says, a scab is something you have to put up with until the time comes that you can pick it off and flick it away. Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood looked forward enormously to the time that they could pick up their daughter, flick her away, and preferably to the next county or even further than that. It was bad enough when people treat their ordinary children as if they were scabs or bunions, but it's something a lot worse when the child in question is extraordinary. What do we think he means by extraordinary? Maybe that's a word we could look up and talk about. And by that I mean sensitive and brilliant. So there's a bit of a clue there. Matilda was both of these things, but above all, she was brilliant. Her mind was so nimble and she was so quick to learn that her ability should have been obvious to even their most half-witted of parents. But Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood were so gormless and so wrapped up in their own silly lives that they failed to notice anything unusual about their daughter. To tell the truth, I doubt they'd have noticed if she'd even crawled back into the house with a broken leg. And Matilda's brother, Michael, was a perfectly normal boy. But the sister, as I said, was something that made your eyes pop. By the age of 1.5, her speech was perfect, and she knew as many words as most grown-ups. The parents, instead of applauding her, called her a noisy chatterbox and told her sharply that small girls should be seen and not heard. By the time she was 3, Matilda had taught herself how to read by studying newspapers and magazines that laid around the house. At the age of 4, she could read so fast and well, she naturally began wanting books. The only book in the whole enlightened household was something called Easy Cooking, and it belonged to her mother. When she read this from cover to cover and had learned all the recipes by heart, she decided she wanted something more interesting. "Daddy," she said, "do you think you could buy me a book?" "A book?" he said. "What do you want a flaming book for?" "To read, Daddy." "What's wrong with a telly, for heaven's sake? We've got a lovely telly with a 12-inch screen, and now you've come asking for a book. You're getting spoilt, my girl." Nearly every weekday afternoon, Matilda was left alone in the house. Her brother was 5 years older than her and went to school, and her father went to work. Her mother went out playing bingo in the afternoons. 8 miles away, Mrs. Wormwood was hooked on bingo and played it 5 afternoons a week. On the afternoon of the day when her father refused to buy her a book, Matilda set off all by herself to watch the public library. When she arrived, she introduced herself to Mrs. Phelps. She asked if she might sit a while to read a book. Mrs. Phelps was slightly taken back by the arrival of such a tiny girl, 4 years old, unaccompanied by a parent. There she is. Nevertheless, she was told she was very welcome. "Where are the children's books, please?" Matilda asked. "They're over on those top shelves," Mrs. Phelps told her. "Would you like me to help you find a nice one with lots of pictures in it?" "No thanks," Matilda said. "I'm sure I can manage." From then on, every afternoon, as soon as her mother left for bingo, Matilda would toddle down to the library. The walk only took 10 minutes, and it allowed her 2 glorious hours sitting quietly by herself in a cosy corner, devouring one book after another. When she'd read every single children's book in the place, she started wandering around in search of something else. Mrs. Phelps had been watching with fascination over the last few weeks, now got up from her desk and went over. "Can I help you, Matilda?" she asked. "I'm wondering what to read next," Matilda said. "I've finished all the children's books." "You mean you've looked at the pictures?" "Yeah, I looked at the pictures, but I've read the books as well." Mrs. Phelps looked down at Matilda from her great height, and Matilda looked right back up at her. "I thought some were very poor," Matilda said, "but others were lovely. I like Secret Garden the best. It was full of mystery. The mystery of a room behind a closed door, and the mystery of a garden behind a big wall." Mrs. Phelps looked stunned. "Exactly how old are you, Matilda?" she asked. 4 years and 3 months, Matilda said. Mrs. Phelps was more stunned than ever, but she had the sense not to show it. "What sort of book would you like to read next?" she asked. Matilda said, "I would like a really good one like the grown-ups read, a famous one, but I don't know any names." Mrs. Phelps looked along the shelves, taking her time. She didn't quite know what to bring out. How, she asked herself, does one choose a famous grown-up book for a 4-year-old girl? Her first thought was to pick up a young teenager romance written for 15-year-old schoolgirls, but for some reason she found herself walking past that shelf. "Try this," she said at last. "It's very famous and very good. If it's a bit long for you, let me know and I'll find something shorter and easier." "Great Expectations," Matilda read, by Charles Dickens. "I'd love to try it." "I must be mad," Mrs. Phelps told herself, but to Matilda she said, "Of course you may try it." Over the next few afternoons, Mrs. Phelps could hardly take her eyes from the small child who now sat hour after hour in the big armchair at the far end of the room with a book on her lap. There we go. It was necessary to rest it on her lap because it was so heavy for her to hold up, a bit like my book. It's a little bit heavy. A strange sight it was, this tiny dark-haired person sitting there with her feet nowhere near touching the ground, totally absorbed in the wonderful adventures in the book of Pip and old Miss Havisham and her cobwebbed house, and a spell of magic that Dickens, a great storyteller, had woven into his words. The only movement from a reader was to lift her hand every now and again and turn her page. Mrs. Phelps felt sad when the time came for her to cross the floor and say, "It's 10 to 5, Matilda." During the first week of Matilda's visits, Mrs. Phelps had said to her, "Does your mother walk you every day and then take you home?" "My mother goes to Aylesbury every afternoon to play bingo," Matilda said. "She doesn't know I come here." "Surely that's not right," Mrs. Phelps said. "I think you better ask her." "I'd rather not," Matilda said. She doesn't encourage reading, neither does my father." "But what do they expect you to do every afternoon in an empty house?" "Just mooch around and watch TV." "I see." "She doesn't really care what I do," Matilda said a little sadly. Mrs. Phelps was concerned about the child's safety, but decided not to interfere. Within a week, Matilda had finished Great Expectations. In that edition, it contained 411 pages. "I loved it," she said to Miss Phelps. "Has Charles Dickens written any more?" "A great number," astounded Mrs. Phelps said. "Shall I choose you another one?" Over the next 6 months, under Mrs. Phelps' watchful eye, Matilda read the following books. Now, some of these are Mrs. Mayron's favourites too. Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens, Jane Eyre, a definite favourite, Pride and Prejudice, another, Tessa of the D'Urbervilles, another, Gone to Earth by Mary Webb, Kim by Rudyard Kipling, The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, The Good Companions by J.B. Priestley, Brighton Rock by Graham Greene, and Animal Farm by George Orwell. Lots of Mrs. Mayron's favourites on there. It was a formidable list, and by now Mrs. Phelps was filled with wonder and excitement. It was probably a good thing that she didn't allow herself to get completely carried away. Almost anyone witnessing the achievements of this small child would have been tempted to make a great fuss and shout the news all over the village and beyond, but not Mrs. Phelps. She was somebody that minded her own business, and had long since discovered it was seldom worth interfering with other people's children. "Mr. Hemingway says there's a lot of things I don't understand," Matilda said to her, "especially about men and women. I loved it all the same. The way he tells it, I feel I am right on the spot watching it all happen." "A fine writer makes you feel like that." "As the reader," Mrs. Phelps said. "But don't worry about the bits you don't understand. Sit back and let the words wash around you like music." I will," said Matilda. "Did you know," Mrs. Phelps said, "that public libraries like this allow you to borrow books and take them home?" "I didn't know that," Matilda said. "Can I do that?" "Of course," said Mrs. Phelps. "When you have chosen the book you want, bring it to me so that I can make a note of it, and it's yours for 2 whole weeks. You can take more than one if you wish." From then on, Matilda would visit the library only once a week in order to take out new books and return the old ones. Her small bedroom now became her reading room, and there was places to sit and read most afternoons, often with a mug of hot chocolate beside her. She was not quite tall enough to reach things around the kitchen, but she kept a small box in the outhouse of things that she brought in and stood on to get whatever she wanted. Mostly it was hot chocolate she made, warming the milk in the saucepan on the stove before mixing it. Occasionally she made Bovril and Ovaltine. It was pleasant to take a hot drink to her room and have it beside her as she read in her silent room. The books transported her to new worlds, introduced her to amazing people who lived exciting lives. She went on olden day sailing ships with Joseph Conrad, another favourite, went up to Africa with Ernest Hemingway, and to India with Rudyard Kipling. She travelled all around the world while sitting in her tiny room in an English village. Okay, so there we go. Your task for today is set on Purple Mash, and it's all about Matilda thinking about what kind of person do we think she is. Think about the way she spoke to the librarian. Think about the way her parents spoke to her. Do we think she's going to be a good character, or do we think she's going to be a bit mean? Is there anybody that you think might be mean in the story? Send me your ideas through Purple Mash. I look forward to reading them. Or you can also record a voice for me. Thank you.